Welcome to Sacred, the podcast that invites you to reclaim your intuition, resist exploitive systems, and remember the love that brought you to teaching and caregiving in the first place.
We are your hosts,
Angela Carolina Garcia
and Lauren Staubel. Join us on a rough and tumble journey of reckoning and transformation. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode. We have a really special guest, Latifah Hanson. When I first even heard Latifah's voice, and it was in a remote meeting even, I just was like, wow, this person's nervous system is regulated. This person has something to offer the world. Especially the world of early childhood education. She is an expert, I later found out, in infant mental health. And in my experience, she embodies what she teaches. So welcome, Latifah.
Thank you.
And before we jump into our conversation, we'll go ahead and get ourselves grounded here as usual. So listeners and Angela and Latifah, feel free to close your eyes if that feels right to you, or you could just look down or lower, soften your gaze, and then take a moment to check in with yourself first. Notice your breath. No need to change anything. Just notice the quality of the breath, like the pace, or the depth, the texture. And if that feels right, you can stay there. And of course, let go of any of this at any moment, if you'd like. But if you want to go a little deeper, you can kind of feel down into whatever it is you're sitting on. Just feel that receptivity of that thing holding you. And if it feels right, see if you can, on your next exhale, release down into it. And then from there, bring your attention back to your breath. And you may decide to pay attention to the pace, the depth, the texture, noticing how it is now. And as you're ready, if you close your eyes, you could slowly begin to open them. Look around in the space where you are, whether it's virtual or 3D, and take it in. If there's anybody in your space, you might smile gently at them, or yourself if you're by yourself. And we'll get ready to jump into a conversation. All right. So, Latifah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the love that brought you to the world of children in the first place?
Sure. It's a long story, but I'll try to make it short. And I'm actually going to start with where I really began, because it kind of was it was my beginning of my learning, I will say. And that was when I first joined what is now called DCF, which was DSS at that time, Department of Social Services. And it was actually in the early 70s when it became a new agency for the state. The agency before that was part of the Department of Welfare. So it included social services as well as the welfare system and the payment of funds for families who were in need. But when it became its own independent agency, it was primarily tasked with investigating child abuse and neglect. And it was it began as a result of a horrific child abuse case back then that really said it needed its own department and its own specialized view of working with children and families. So having said that, that's where I began. And I was there for 15 years. And fortunately, I had many opportunities to work in that department or that agency in a variety of ways. But the one that was most significant to me was when I began doing actual investigation of child abuse and neglect and became an ongoing social worker for families who had been reported on and had positive reports of abuse and neglect. And for me, it was an incredible learning opportunity, not only in the sense of learning how the system worked, but also learning about families, especially young families with young children. And my commitment and love began there because what I realized very quickly was all these mothers loved their children, and while they may have been neglectful and they may have even been abusive in some situations, I always felt that it was not intentional, that it was the given situation. It was even to some degree, some depression. Some of it was that they were abused themselves, and that it was a historical, multi-generational context to why they ended up in this situation. And that experience basically gave me the greatest respect for parents. And you would think that, would horrify me with some of the things that unfortunately I saw and some of the things I had to end up doing by taking children out of the house sometimes. But in fact, it had the opposite effect. It really gave me an appreciation for these women and their children and what they were going through. And it gave me a different perspective of how they needed to be understood and worked with. So that's where I began. And from there, and my journey has been I've been growing ever since, but that's been kind of the basis of my beginning and my learning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about the generational piece in what you were mentioning, and my mom was so tough on me when I was really young. And now that I'm older, I talk more with her, and she's like, I didn't know at the time that I was so tough, but that's how my mom was. And that's how my grandma was. And that's how my grandpa was. And it's the way that they take care of us isn't always the safest, but it does come from something and somewhere that they might have learned it from.
Exactly.
So thank you for sharing. We have a long-term vision of community that is rooted in sacred relationships. And that's full spectrum in the sense that it can be very fun and easy to be in a relationship, or sometimes it's really hard and complicated, as some of the experiences that you've had. And so what does sacred relationships mean to you, Latifah?
That's a tough question. I guess it kind of depends on each individual's mindfulness about where they are at that moment. And when I say that moment, I mean now. But and that's kind of hard to always retain. But I think for me, it comes from another piece of myself, which is to be authentic to who I am. And authenticity is really important to me. And I think sometimes I lose track of it because of all the pressures or all the messages that we're bombarded with sometimes in early care, and policies and practices and blah, 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 blah. And sometimes we lose what was authentic that brought us to this. Not only the experience that I explained with DSS or DCF, but also in my heart and the lessons that I learned from that, and remaining authentic to that initial belief that all families are good and that they all want what's best for their children. And that authentic piece of me, I try to keep remembering and bring it forth, especially when it feels as though systems and people try to tear you down or try to say that's not the right way to do it, whatever they're doing, and sometimes in spaces where it's actually very white orientated, I'll be blunt with that, it's hard to get them to understand what I mean by my own authenticity. And that myself as a BIPOC or a woman of color, I have some values and some beliefs and some cultures that I bring with me that need to be lifted. And it doesn't always allow you to do that in some contexts, in early care and education, especially. Because there's so many policies, so much expectations, so many restrictions, so many to-dos lists, and that you get bombarded by that, and you forget about your own authentic self. So for me, that's what it means. That spiritual relationship to me is to being that authentic self to whatever relationship I'm engaged in.
Thank you for that authentic reply. I wonder if there's a moment or situation that you remember specifically. I'm sure there's more than one, but that forced you to kind of reckon with those issues.
Tell me a little bit more. I'm sorry.
Well, if you mentioned a couple of things, I definitely heard whiteness there. That the systems and policies also, and even it could be the specific person's leadership. Even, I mean, Angela and I both have stories related to that, right? So, like, there are these. We all come with this. We're like called to this work. It's not because we get paid well. It's really, we're the people that set out to do something meaningful in our work. So, and it's that sacredness that calls us, but there are these other things, right? So, maybe were there any specific moments in your journey in which you were like, oh, that is an issue that is interfering with my relationships, essentially, or your authenticity?
I have many, I'm sure, but I would say one in particular recently was in an early care center where there was one classroom where there were at least 5 or 6 children that came with self-regulatory or co-regulatory issues, possibly some issues of autism or on the spectrum, language issues. I mean, they had major challenges, and 2 teachers in a classroom of 18 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And that in itself is crazy. But having at least 5 or 6 kids that needed special attention, and even when you sent them for referrals, let's say for BPS, a lot of them were rejected because they observed them and didn't see anything wrong. And it's not something that the teacher, if she had either more help or smaller classrooms, couldn't manage and help them to gain those skills, those social emotional skills. But in the context in which she was working, it was impossible. And I remember attempting to have a conversation with people in the system about how they choose which rooms children go into and whether or not there was a way to manage how they assign certain children to certain classrooms so that you didn't have 5 or 6 kids like this in one classroom, but that you could look at it holistically and say, well, maybe I should put them over here because this classroom doesn't have as many needy kids. And it was understood, but they're also driven by a larger system, which dictates their funding, dictates the policy in which they have to operate, dictates how they have to fill slots, and so having that luxury to pick and choose, or even to give her some additional help, was really difficult for them too. And I'm not faulting the individuals, but the system. I think that the early care system is broken. And as we all know, since COVID, it's incredibly in need of repair. And And everybody's trying to get back into the realm of doing business as usual, but it's not business as usual anymore. These kids that I'm talking about were home for 2 years. 2 years, and nobody's really talking about post-COVID. What happened to those kids in those 2 years? A lot of them who would have been referred for maybe EI or other services didn't get that because everything was closed down. So they were home with parents that were overwhelmed. Stories that I heard is that a lot of them sat in front of the TV. A lot of them were cared for by older siblings while mom was on remote. I mean, it was incredible. And none of us have really stopped to think about what that impact has been, not only for the child, but how it's now been on the system as these children return back into the early care world, and how unprepared we were for them in terms of what they've been dealing with for 2 years and being so isolated and not getting the services they need. And so some of them have aged out. They're no longer eligible for EI. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, not. The system and the public school system is slow because they're also responding to 2 years being shut down. So getting referrals and getting children into that system is slower than usual. We're understaffed. There's not enough teachers to go around, so you can't get teachers in the classroom to help this particular teacher. So it's a multitude of problems, and it's not any one, and it's a challenge, but it needs to be fixed if we're going to really start to make any progress and move forward with helping not only these children, but the ones that are coming behind.
Yeah. Lauren and I talk a lot about our system, and I don't think that people outside of the work that we do, outside of early child care, really understand the depths of the work or like the intricacies of what's going on, specifically now post-COVID, thinking a lot about what you said in regards to those babies were home for 2 years. Mm. They didn't have the opportunity, or their parents may not have known about like the milestones that needed to be reached at that time, whether it's their fine motor skills or their gross motor skills or their speech development or their ability to socialize with others. Those skills that happen even by going out regularly to the park and hanging out with new friends, that was something that wasn't able to happen safely for 2 years. And it was really scary. And so the babies that are coming in to school now, they're different kinds of babies, and the workforce wasn't prepared for it. And we still currently are. I think that we can keep funneling money into early child care, even though it's not a lot, but what we are getting. But I don't think that at a systems level, we're talking enough about the past problems that we were having and how are we working with those while also working on the ones that are now here, right. That are brand new problems, right? So
and if I could just add to that, you said something interesting about how others don't really understand the work that we do in early care. I was actually having lunch with a couple of friends who are not in early care, and we were talking about the debt ceiling, which seems totally unrelated. But I said to them, do you know that the solution that they came up with is to require that people who receive food stamps now work in order to receive them? And they said, oh, well, that makes sense. If they're able-bodied, they should do that. And I said, do you know who receives food stamps? Single working moms. They're the ones that receive it. So when you talk about going back to work, it's not that easy, because then you have a very broken early care system, which we're still trying to fix. And now we're talking about more children and more families having to come into the system. So you're right. People don't think about the impact of some of the decisions that are made in Congress, that are made in our own city, about what that means to a system of early care. And what that means for parents that now are going to be forced to have to go to work because they have to get these food stamps. But then who's going to take care of the kids? Where are these kids going to go? And so it's another example. And so today, interestingly, in Massachusetts, our budget is coming up, and there's voting going on right now. And I happen to get an email saying, write to your people in Congress, not Congress, but, city council, wherever, the state and the Senate House. And I sent it to those two friends. And I said, here's your chance to make a difference and to understand how we need the support and this revenue to support early care. So it was a great opportunity for them to learn, like you're saying, to talk about those people who aren't involved in this, but a great opportunity for them to put some words to actions to their words too. So I took advantage of it and sent it to them and said, here's your chance to make sure that if we have to take more kids, we need more money. We need to figure out this out. So.
Right.
I'm going to go off our plan a little bit, just because Angela and I were having a imaginative conversation this morning, and we were starting to think, what would it be like if communities, right? So each of us has this kind of ancestral knowledge about how children have been cared for throughout time. And so we might not even have it consciously. It might be from people we've never met who lived before us. Mm-hmm. But, what would it be like if communities could tap into that and say, this is how we want to do child's care. I had in a meeting with a person who was on a board for early childhood education. And I was like, how many parents would like to stay home with their children and can't? And wouldn't that help to solve the childcare crisis? Because fewer children would need childcare, fewer families would need childcare. And he was like, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen in the U.S.
Why?
I don't remember his answer, unfortunately, but he was in charge of the budget. So there's some kind of budgetary reason that there's maybe it's even unconscious of that's not an option for us, but they do this in other parts of the world, right? People who want to stay home with their children get to, right? So I don't know if you could tap into your, your own wisdom, Latifah. And, you have so much experience in different parts of the field, even if you could reach in and beyond, and I'm putting you on the spot, but is it,
not on the script.
It is not. I wonder if there's anything that comes to you, and feel free if it doesn't come to you now, if it pops into your mind at any moment. That's for you too, Angela. Question. What would we actually do if we could just redesign it today?
Right. I think that's an excellent question. And I really do appreciate you asking that. And I have a couple of thoughts, but the first thought I have is when this person said that will never happen, the first thought that came in my mind is in America, we don't value families as much as in other countries. And I think that's part of the problem. I'm not saying that he doesn't value families, but I think we don't think in the context of what's best for families and children. We think in the context of what's best for the economy. We think in context of many other things, but families first is not the priority. And that's to say, let me just clarify that. That's not the priority for some families. For families who can afford it, that is a priority. And they choose to do that. Many people do stay home with their children. It's in the communities that are marginalized, that are in poverty, that are oppressed, that are part of a systemic racism system. They're the ones that don't have that luxury. So I'm curious to know why he thinks that's not a possibility, but I think we have to keep in mind all of those reasons for why poor people don't have that luxury. And also keep in mind that America generally doesn't put the families first, regardless of your income. Everybody should have that opportunity, regardless of how much money you make. But we don't have that option. So that's one thing. The other thing, when you talked about ancestral, oh my goodness. We come with so much ancestral beliefs and values that we don't often stop and tap into. And recently, I've been a part of a group working with Jewish Family Children's Services, where this past year, we actually had 15 BIPOC mental health, early care, family and child providers to learn about infant early childhood mental health consultation. And as part of that year-long training, it was very intense, but there was also a group that myself and another facilitator facilitated in terms of what does it feel like to be BIPOC and do this work? And how do we tap into our ancestral sacred beliefs and values that keep us motivated and to keep us moving forward? But not only that, how do we help the parents that we work with to also understand that it's there, but we've adapted the way we parent primarily due to, again, oppressive discriminatory practices. So just a very simple example for me is I don't let my kids go out and play because there's too much shooting going on. That's an adaptation. That's not what you would normally do if you're down in the country in North Carolina, you know what I mean? But because we live in dangerous cities, that's the choice people have to make. Or I've adapted the way I parented. So I'm really strict on my boys, and you can't do this and you can't do that because I got to keep you safe. Those are adaptive behaviors that we have learned from generation to generation based on intergenerational trauma that we have now become to accept as norms, and they're not. And so part of this group that we were a part of was to stop pulling back the onion, if you will, pulling back the layers of our authentic selves and to find those values and beliefs that were ancestral and to raise those up and to understand the adaptive behaviors and try to take them out of our repertoire, if you will. And it was a fascinating, interesting conversation for a whole year. Every Wednesday we met, and every 2 weeks, rather, I'm sorry. And we're just about to come to an end, but to the credit of JFCS, Jewish Family Children's Services, they really understood the need for BIPOC professionals who work with families and children to have this sacred space to do this work, because it impacts the work that we do with families and children every day. And so what we bring to it as clinicians, as educators, is what we bring as ourselves. And if we start pulling back the layers from ourselves, we can help families to do the same thing. I forgot where I was going with that, but it's kind of like what you're saying. I love that idea of the ancestral beliefs and values and how we need to get back to those. And and just one more thing, in the process, a couple of months ago, I watched a webinar of a woman who actually did some studies in other cultures and other countries. And the practices of parenting is what she was looking at. And it looked very different from the Western world. And one example was a little boy of 3 or 4 years old was busy pushing the cows into the barn. And he was out there by himself. And everyone, in the group was like, that would never happen in America where a child was that independent. But the point was, that's how he grew up. And that independence gave him the skill that the family needed to get the cows into the barn. I mean, it sounds simple, but it freaked a lot of the Western people out in the webinar. But we freaked out because, it's not heard of in terms of how we parent here. And I think that, and there was an adult nearby. It's just that you couldn't see them in the film and they weren't on top of the board, but the father was there guiding, but from a distance, and didn't feel the need to have to take that child by the hand and show him what to do, because this child has been doing this now probably since he was 2 and very used to it. So again, that ancestral parenting can look very different in different cultures, different countries, different communities. And I love the idea of what if we went to each community and said, what would it look like for you? And get their input in terms of like, I would rather stay home, or I would rather this, or what. That would be a good place to start as we begin to change the system, is to hear what the people want. What does it look like for you?
Right.
What childcare look like for you if you had a choice? What would you want it to be about? Would you rather stay home and teach your child yourself?
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
Uh, yeah. I can also imagine all of those things.
Huh?
I can also imagine all of those things or reimagine all of those systems. Um, I'm thinking a lot about what you were saying about the 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 community work that you were doing, where you were peeling the onions and the layers. And this weekend or last week, we were at a conference, Lauren and I, and we got to hear the work of Dr. Joy
Mm.
DeGruy. And she was saying about the secret. Moms know the secret about how to keep their children safe. And because of these secrets, we have to raise our children differently. And you only know that. You only know the secrets because of the life that you've had to live as a Black woman, as a Black mother, as a brown mother. And I was thinking a lot about that as you were saying that, because I think in our homes, particularly Black and brown homes, we know that our parents love us, but they're so tough on us. And it's always like, why can't I just go and play? Or there's these very silly videos on social media that talk a lot about, like, I could never speak that way to my mom.
Exactly.
I could not speak to my mom the way that white boy talks to his mom or that white girl talks to her mom. Um, and at home, we know why we can't do that. And in public, we know why we have to act a certain way.
Exactly.
But I think that that's because of the conditions that our society, specifically in our westernized context, and more specifically in our American context, it is in relationship to the discrimination and the exploitation and the need to keep us in, quote unquote, in our place. And so sometimes I think that, and Lauren and I have talked about this, that the system is working the way it was designed. It's not a broken system necessarily. It's working in the way that it was designed. And so we just need a new system.
Exactly.
We need our own system, our own decolonized early child care system.
And I
And
think
so,
that many of the women that were in that group spoke with the same thing you're saying, Angela. I could never talk to my mother like that. And they had a hard time, not a hard time, but part of the discussion was about how do you help parents understand the emotional and social need their children. No, let me rephrase that. How do you help parents understand the importance of the social and emotional development of babies to 5 years old? How do you help them understand what's going on in that brain and how important that connection and relationship is? And it doesn't mean you have to be mean. You just have to be nurturing. You just have to love. And there are limits that you can still put on 3 and 4 year olds that says you can keep them out of danger. This is not we do it all the time. Don't touch the stove. You know what I mean? We all heard that. And there are things that you can still do as a parent to sort of keep those lines of safety and boundaries clear between parent and child. But you don't have to do it in such a punitive way that, like there's a famous saying that I hate, well, I'll say it. I brought you in this world and I can take you out of this world kind of concept and idea that a lot of BIPOC families in particular, and I'm sure others as well, grow up with that mentality that I'm in charge here and you do what I say. And there's not a mutuality in terms of the connection relationship with that child that I would like to see more of between parents and their children.
It just came to me, and we're thinking about systems, and we're talking about systems, and we're talking about discrimination and the exploitation that happens a very fine in what may seem to be an invisible way, but it's happening, and we feel it and we see it, but it's happening. And I'm thinking of a moment where I asked my mentor Kate, why the kids were playing certain games, allowed to play certain games. And she brought up the idea of a sense of power in early childcare. And we know that in early childhood, children need to have a sense of agency and autonomy. And in that development, there's this power dynamic that begins to exist as they figure out who they are. And the ability to impose power is also something that's happening developmentally, but also something that they're seeing, right? Like children see, like we as the adults are consistently imposing power. But right now, when you said what you said about how parents say things like, if I brought you in this world, I can take you out of it. My mom was very good at saying, if you're going to call the cops on me, I'm going to give you a reason to call the cops on me.
And you knew what that meant, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it feels like it's a parent's way of not only keeping us safe, but also their search for power or the need for power in a context of being so dehumanized because of parenting, or so dehumanized because you're Black or because you're poor and in the workforce and you don't have enough. And this disconnection from your humanity, like, wait, like I need someone to hear you. And sadly, it's our babies that get that version of us. Like we can't impose our power on our babies.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. We all want power in some part of our lives where we have control. But if you don't have it in any other parts of your life, who are you going to do it to? But your children. You know, you have to have power over them. There's a wonderful program that, again, with Jewish Family Children Services, called the Circle of Security. And you have to be a licensed facilitator in order to facilitate this group with parents. And we're also doing it with teachers in the classroom. But basically, it talks about relationships, how to have a healthy relationship with your child, how to recognize the cues of when they're going out and how to support that going out and that exploration and be proud of it and say, what a wonderful job, but also understand the cues when they come back in and they need that love and that nurturing and they need you to be the hands for them and to carry them. But it also talks about at times you have to be bigger and stronger, and sometimes you have to be weaker and little. And what that means is that sometimes you have to learn what your child is trying to tell you, basically. And it's a wonderful example of how to build a good relationship with your children. It's for all parents from kids 0 to 8, but it also is, I learned something with my 18-year-old grandson when I was in the training as a facilitator, which was how to read the cues and how to be the hands when they need you. So my 18-year-old came in one day complaining about his mom. And of course, his Nana, you can always talk to me. You can't say to mom, but you can say it to me. But I didn't give him a chance because I was busy and I was in the middle of doing something. And I said, oh, I can talk to you later, but he went back down to his room and I thought and said, oh my goodness, I missed this opportunity to connect with him because I'm too busy. And I stopped what I was doing, went downstairs and said, I'm really sorry. You had something important you wanted to say, and I was not being very friendly or not listening to you. And it brought a smile to his face. I didn't expect a smile, but it was kind of like, yeah, thank you. I need someone to talk to. And I offered him to talk at that point, and he told me what he wanted to say. And it wasn't that he was looking for anybody to fix the problem or give him suggestions, just to listen and to connect. So the most important thing about the Circle of Security training is how to help parents connect with their children and to build healthy relationships, which in the long term are going to help their children when they get into preschool and they get into kindergarten, because that's the stage where they start looking at, what do I know about my relationships And now in the context with other people, what do I know and how do I use those relationships? If you come from a healthy relationship at home, you're going to go into the world expecting healthy relationships for others. And it's a give and take, not only for the person, the adult, but the child too, learns to understand how to regulate himself or herself in different contexts in the world. And teachers often talking about, ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and getting ready for school. But for me, the most important thing is learning how to regulate yourself, how to look at yourself in comparison to the world and feel okay about yourself. And you won't get that unless you've got caring, connected caregivers that give you that sense of self. So when you go into that first grade, second grade, or whatever, you've got a sense of who you are, and it's good and it's healthy. And the 1, 2, 3s will come later in the ABCs.
It makes me, the conversation makes, I'm just reflecting on my own childhood too. And of course, family mantra, what's the matter with you? Right? I don't know. Why did you do that? I don't know. Right? And I think, and it could picture like the adult's face and everything, right? So that's like their nervous system is coming at my nervous system. And that's scary. Right?
For a child, yeah.
Right? Kids feel safe with a regulated adult. Their nervous systems know when our nervous systems are regulated, and they want to be around us when that's happening. Right? That is the ultimate moment for connection, opportunity for connection. But we can't get there with this on our. Wait, sorry, I'm making a scowling face right now for the listeners. I think that because we didn't learn how to feel stuff as kids, we learned that feeling stuff is not okay. That it's so if somebody quote unquote makes me feel something, I feel angry that they made me feel something. So I feel the first thing I felt, even if it was sad, and now I'm angry that you made me feel sad. Right. And so I think kids are especially evocative. They do all kinds of stuff we didn't plan for them to do. And so, and even if we think about shame, and we feel embarrassed that the child did something, then our reaction is like, you did that to me. And we totally forget we're like this huge human compared to them. It's, how could they possibly have more power than we do? Right? It's just absurd. But our nervous system does not, or our limbic system is really, or especially the amygdala, is not rational. So amygdala is like, what this other human here, no matter what size they are, is a threat to my comfort or my understanding of who I am, or feel a sense of feeling in control. And then we just blah out at the child, right? So not for anybody who's listening, who's like, oh, geez, I just did that this morning. It's my kid. Like, don't worry, you're okay. Like, I love, Latifah, you just talked about, it wasn't, you didn't, the experience that you gave wasn't like a terrible experience with your grandson, but that going back is really important. Well, we've learned so much about how important repair is. And you can't keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. That's not repair. Like, you actually have to work on something in between. But that going back is what, when you're calm, when your nervous system is regulated, is so, I'm like, your grandson just smiled. Even like that's a automatic reaction, right? Like that, you probably released oxytocin together in that moment. So powerful.
And there's one thing in the circle of security, then you brought it up, and it's called rupture and repair. Mm-hmm. So when you have a rupture in that relationship, you need to go back and repair it. And like you said, you can't keep repairing. But I find that when you repair, it stays with you. That smile will always stay with me because I got a sense of connection with him, and he connected with me. So whenever ruptures occur again, which they probably will, in fact, they did a couple of weeks ago with me and him, I handle it differently. I don't get all upset. I don't, but I don't dismiss them, but I acknowledge that we're not connecting right now and we're going to come back at this. But I think you're right. I mean, if you experience that repair, you learn how to handle ruptures better. And the other thing that you talked about, Lauren, was, why are you acting like that? I find that amazing, especially with 2 and 3-year-olds. They don't know. And then the other thing that we used to do that I don't think we do as much anymore is put them in timeout. Go and sit down and you understand that what you did wrong. Then you can come up. They're 2 years old. How do they know what they did wrong? And what we're saying to them is go over there and get yourself together. But like you're saying, the brain is not developed yet to understand that. And instead of taking that opportunity to teach them and to connect with them about what is not working well, we punish them by sending them away and saying, now go think about it. It's so absurd. And I'm always asking this question whenever I have discussions with early care educators and others in mental health. Well, do you think it would be different if we start in the early care systems and in the early care educational systems, teaching people and helping them understand the development of the brain? From the moment that child is 2 or 3 months old, what is actually going on with that brain? And I was watching a video the other day, and this guy, newborn baby, 2 months old, and he said something to him. The baby immediately looked right at him and smiled. And there was like a connection already at 2 months. And people don't understand that it starts so early. So my question to you guys is, especially those of you who are working in the educational field, do you think it would make a difference if we taught more about how that brain works? And should we include some of that in the teachings of early child development?
100% yes.
Yes. I really need to figure out how to do it then.
Lauren and I have had this conversation many times, and I didn't start learning about probably right towards the end of my master's program. And then when I school where I did research together.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you 1 second?
And then I started looking a little bit into.
I'm sorry, Angela, but you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's me, but you're freezing on the screen occasionally. And so when you're speaking, I'm not hearing it.
Interesting. Yeah. Will you say that part again?
Yeah. Could you say it again?
Yeah. So yes, we definitely need that in the way that we're educating future teachers. But a lot of it comes from, what I was sharing was that I didn't begin to learn about brain development until well into my master's program. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing research with Lauren, and in early childcare, it's an immense privilege to be able to get your master's degree in early childcare. If you have gone through the field and you end up with a master's degree in early childhood education, I think that that's a great privilege. There's an accessibility that's given to you that most of our early childhood teachers do not get. Mm-hmm. Most of our early childhood teachers are 1 or 2 classes in, straight out of college, or this is a position that there was an opening and a friend recommended, and they just needed to take 2 hours of professional development, and now they're preschool teachers. Right. And they're probably there because I love babies, or I have a nephew, or my little niece goes to school here or some sort. And the classes that they're given based off of what the state is regulating are classes on how to manage a classroom, or how to understand children's growth, not necessarily what's happening developmentally, but that's also the disconnect of what's happening, right? I think that's the way that the system sort of is these are the things that we value the most, and we don't value understanding human development at its base. We value that children are safe in the building that they're in and the care that they're with. And we've like checked all of the boxes that say that you are now safe to be with children.
Right, right. And so when you talk about, again, a system that needs repairing, it's not just at the front level with the teachers. It's not just at the system level with the centers themselves. It's the educational system, needs to rethink how we train people to go into this field. And I think the other thing that I love so much about what you guys are doing, but not only teaching about brain development, child development, all that, but to find that sacred space that they come to this field with. Because that's what you always go back on. You can get frustrated, you can get tired, but you got to remember why you're here. And 40 years later, I still love what I'm doing. I get frustrated. Sometimes I'm like, what am I going? I'm supposed to be retired. But I still I love the opportunity to help and to create change within the system that I feel it needs still work. And it's not that we haven't come a long way, because let me tell you, 40 years ago, we didn't even have any standards in the early care world by which all programs had to operate. So when NIAC, now everybody has to at least have a NIAC standard of operation or a Head Start standard. There was none of that. Everybody was doing what they thought was the ABCs of early care and education, which was academic behavior and cognitive development. Wow.
My aunt had a neighborhood daycare, and I think she had like 12 to 20 kids on the day. They were just all the neighborhood kids came to her house after school or during the day.
Exactly. So we've come a long way, but I agree with you. I wish we could do more to even raise the standards of what it means to be a teacher, to come in and be a lead teacher. That we need to. And I think that, there's a lot of ways to do it. I know people are tired of taking classes and everybody isn't prepared for the academic world, but we can do mentoring. We could do like people who have masters could come in an hour. Whatever. We could think of different ways of helping people to understand child development beyond what they get at the very basics of the schools or educational systems that they go to. Now that Lauren's in this field, we can pressure her to do
right.
No pressure, Lauren, no pressure.
Sounds good to me. So we, this sacredness, right? This we think has something to do with spirituality, and I know that something that's important to you, right? Children and their mental wellness. How does this connect with spirituality for you? And, answer that about the children, but also for yourself. What is it that keeps you coming back? We kind of are hinting at like, maybe it's related to spirituality in some way. So tackle that question however it calls you.
Yeah, well, I think when we talked about this early, when we first started talking about it, I was having a little issue with the word spirituality, only because many people interpret it in many ways. There is no one interpretation of it. If you come from a strong religious space, you have one interpretation of it. If you come from a mental health, as I do, you have maybe another interpretation of it. But for me, I still want to go back to my authentic self. That's my spirituality. And it's grounded in ancestral beliefs and values. And I say that in terms of when I look at African American communities, there's a strong connection that goes back for centuries about how we take care of each other. And how we've actually survived and how we have what is called this resilience. So where does that come from? Why? How will we, and not just African Americans, I think all people have this, but that's my spirituality, is that connectedness to my ancestral self. It's being authentic to what I believe are my beliefs and values that stemmed from my grandmother and my great-grandmother and her great-grandmother. And part of it is this family first mentality, always family first. Another part of it is respect for who you are and respect others for who they are. So there's that connectedness for me. That's a spirituality. And I think another piece of it is a more higher moral character, if you will, that kind of dictates that the old saying, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, And so when it comes to that word, spirituality, that's what I think of. And I can't help but bring that forward or to raise that up when I'm thinking about children as well. Is that authentic self, that do unto others, love them as I would want to be loved by others. So if I have that authenticness about myself, I don't go in yelling at children. I don't go in thinking that they're bad. I don't go in blaming them for my own troubles. It eliminates a lot of things that we can do as humans, like you talked about, Lauren. What's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Giving them the power that they're making me upset. I don't come with that because I come from this other spiritual self that says, I'm going to love you like I want you to love me. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's a hard word to describe.
Sounds like you've reclaimed your intuitive teaching. Yeah, you took it back.
That's great, Angela.
Yeah, that was so beautiful and well said. Thank you for saying.
Thank you.
I think when Lauren and I started thinking about the words we wanted to use for the podcast and in the podcast and in the conversations, we talked a lot about using the word spirituality. And somewhere along the lines, we were like, no, but we get to reclaim that for what and we get to use this space to say there's lots of different that is good.
You're breaking up again.
That way doesn't mean that it's not good. Oh no, that's so sad.
We lost the last three sentences.
Okay. Angela, we keep losing you.
I hear. I'm okay.
Yeah, you're talking, but we don't hear you because your picture freezes.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the last part that you heard?
It was a while back. Do you remember, Lauren?
You explained a kind of the thought process that we went through in terms of the words we chose for this podcast. And you were going on to say something about the different ways, I think, that...
Yes. And so, but we thought a lot about the word spirituality and the words that we wanted to use. And somewhere along the lines, we said that we have the right to use the word spirituality, because spirituality is not only in a religious context. The way that we feed ourselves and the way that we take care of our soul and take care of our own mental health is usually related to something that doesn't have a physical space, or is something internal, and that's spirituality. And so I appreciated you saying that, and also bringing the awareness to talk about spirituality. And it makes me think about rough and tumble, and do we do it? Do we not do it? How vulnerable should we be? How vulnerable should we not be? And I'm wondering if you're open to sharing a little bit about your reflective practice and the rough and tumbles that go into that, or that might happen for you in that sense.
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that again, because you kind of froze again. So I didn't hear the beginning of your statement. So
maybe I should ask.
Yeah, maybe you should do it.
Okay. Sorry. Technology. So we talk a lot about rough and tumble. Angela and I both love rough and tumble play, and it is, it's not simple. It's complex. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But we use it as a metaphor to think about our reflective practice. So does that resonate with you at all, rough and tumble in terms of a reflective
It's not.
practice?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not quite sure. No, it doesn't.
I love that.
If you could give a little bit more definition in terms of how it relates to your reflective thinking.
Yeah, well, so I guess the key things are like, okay, rough and tumble play is intrinsically motivated. It comes from within. It is both like I'm thinking about two kiddos that love each other, right? They trust each other. One kid, maybe this child is just like looking off into the sky because there's like a bird or something. And the other kid just comes out of nowhere and just bulldozes his friend. And so the child stands up and is like, whoa, who was that? Oh, it's you. That was fun. Or the child looks up and says, who are you? That was not safe. Right. So it's that, what thoughts are coming at us in that moment? Do we say like, well, we talked about this in episode 1, where, this thought might come up and be like, whoa, whose thought is that? Like that does not belong to me. That belongs to that system. Or and so how do we, tease out like what's coming at us right now? Is this for me to reflect on? Is this for me to work on? If there is this, I can be vulnerable in thinking about that aspect of my work or that relationship with that colleague or the child or my family member. Then we can engage a little bit, and it might be uncomfortable to say like, oh, hey, maybe my role in that was not cool in that moment, or what could I have done differently? Or how could I have listened to myself better? I guess that's what we mean when we're talking about the rough and tumble parts of it, of the, it is a give and take, but right. We have to be discerning, I guess, about the work that we're doing within our own heads.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think that comes up a lot in the work that I do in terms of infant mental health consultation. And by that, what I do is actually sit and observe a child and an adult caretaker and watch their interactions. And instead of putting my own thoughts of interpreting what's going on, I'm taught to wonder what's going on. So instead of injecting, oh, they must be happy because they're playing together, I'm asking, why are they so happy? Or I'm asking, is this for real? Or is it just a pretend for it could be any kind of wondering. The intent is not to jump to conclusions, not to assume, but to wonder. And then when that caretaker and I are sitting alone with each other, I will ask questions about, how did that feel to sit with that child today? So I'm still wondering, you know what I mean? And I'm still trying to understand what her or his intentions were when they were bumbling or playing with their child or yelling at the child, whatever was going on between that interaction. So I'm always starting from, that's where the reflection for us starts, with wondering first, not assuming. Well, first starts with just observing, then wondering what you've observed, and then asking for clarity around what you think, maybe what you observed, to get that person to tell you what they really were thinking or doing. And then maybe asking, well, did that feel good for you? Or is there anything I can do? Sorry, background. Anything I could do that would be helpful for you to improve that relationship, let's say. And it's still never a position of, I know what to do or fix it kind of mentality. It's a working together to find the solutions to make that a more healthy relationship. And maybe playing was not the best example I should use, because typically that's a good thing. But in infant childhood consultation, you often see children who are like running out the other kids and knocking down their toys, and teachers trying to handle that. And so that wondering is starts right from that observation, starts from that place of what did that feel like for you, the teacher, starting from that point of how can I help? What could we do differently? Helping them to find solutions and not fixing it for them. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what reflection is in the work that I do.
That sounds really spacious.
It is very spacious and very hard, actually.
Yeah. Right.
And I have to say, I'm still learning this. I've only started doing consultation a year ago. And I finished my first year. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of like, this is hard work. Very hard work. And thinking about what does it mean to go forward with this and do some more for another year? I don't know yet.
Thank you for sharing that. That is like, I hope that my brain is doing what your brain is doing, Latifah, in my quote unquote retirement. That is like incredibly inspiring that you are doing this new work, but you're choosing to do something that is hard for you. But there's even to recognize where it's hard is part of the process, right? That is like, that is the work and to say, this is hard and I'm going to keep doing it. There's like, maybe that comes back to that sacredness of, the reason that you came in the first place of, even, is the parental relationships that brought you into it at first. And now you're looking at teaching. Do I have that right? That mostly you're working with teachers rather than parents now?
Early care teachers, yeah.
Okay. There's that sacredness. It is I coach students in practicum. It is, I am blown away by their willingness to be observed in the most. I had a student one day, this was before the pandemic, so I was still observing in person. I came, she completely forgot that I was coming. And it was because their center they were understaffed. She had 2 classes in one room with her, with another teacher, and it was absolutely chaotic. But she was like, I don't want to waste your time. You drove, although it's hard to get around in Boston. You spent the time to get here. Just observe me teaching. It was awful for all of us. It was just painful. But I was just so humbled that she was like, you know what? This is real. And please give me some feedback. Yeah. What would you have done in that situation?
To put themselves and be vulnerable like that.
Yes, it's such a gift to be able to receive that as the observer. I remember the first time I watched a video of myself teaching. It was so painful. I was like, oh, is that what my face looks like? It was surprising. And so I never take that for granted, but it sounds like the work that you're doing right now is really engaging in that, perhaps in a similar way that, but because of the vulnerability, maybe at the core.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think I appreciate what you're saying in terms of putting myself in a space that is totally new for me, because I've had a lot of involvement with children and families, but it's primarily since I left DCF, it's been as an administrator. And you have a very different stance as an administrator than you do as an observer or reflective work that I'm doing now. And it's challenging to give up that piece of yourself. But I also try at least to keep myself involved in other ways where I think I can have immediate impact, or at least some impact in the near future. And that's to be on the board, for example, of NIAC, where I can bring people in to talk to them and help them understand what social and emotional development is, to get them to commit some money for putting that into the classrooms or getting family providers the circle of security training that will help them to also be more connected and intuitive about their own teaching and learning. So in that aspect of myself, I love that work and will continue to do that. And I'm on a couple of other councils in terms of Boston Family Engagement Network. So I find other ways where I can still lift up my beliefs and my values and my way of being authentic to myself, where I think I can have an impact as well, even if I don't have an immediate impact when I'm just not just observing, but I'm observing and trying to support teachers, because that's a long process. And it takes time for them to, like you said, to put themselves out there and be vulnerable to have that kind of feedback. So on that note,
Yes.
try to stay busy.
You're succeeding.
Angela, welcome back. We missed you.
Yes. I think it was the location. Hopefully this works out better. But I got to listen to everything, so that was nice.
Good.
Good.
So we have a long-term vision that includes thriving and thinking about thriving, and what does it do? And so we're wondering, what does thriving look like to you in the work that you're doing and in your context?
Well, I think I just try to explain. I think thriving for me is finding, let me rephrase that. Thriving for me is about surviving, basically. And I try to do that by finding different contexts where I can have successes and feeling like my work matters. And I think that if I didn't have those opportunities, I would not thrive too long. I think I would get burned out. And I think that's true for anybody that's working in this field. This field is hard work. There's no doubt about it. And if you don't find ways where you can at least feel some successes, at least for me, then I'm not thriving. I'm not doing. So I try to, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, stay involved in a number of different aspects of the field, like being on a board or being on a council and being engaged in my community. I'm, for example, going to do a circle of security at my local library this summer. And that's just for the community members in my community. So finding ways where I can still, again, remain authentic to myself is thriving to me. That's how I thrive. And I think that's how I've done it for 40 years, to tell you the truth, just bits and pieces of successes that keep me going. And people that I love working with, like you guys, and finding innovative ways like you're doing to get the message out there, I think is incredible.
Thank you. I feel so validated.
You should be. I said to Lauren, oh my God, this is so needed for people to have some place to tune into and to feel validated themselves.
Yes.
And to lift them up.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I've been thinking a lot about thriving and I don't know I sometimes feel like I know what that looks like or what that means. And then I remember, if you've never been in a position of thriving, then you probably don't know what that feels like. And so I'm like, oh, I've never probably felt that thing before. So what should I be looking for? And so right now that you said, it's also part of surviving. And that's something that was said in our last episode that we recorded, that thriving is connected to their survival as well. And I'm thinking about my full-time job and all of the work that I do. And I have a friend who's always like, Angela, why do you have so much work? Like, first of all, because I need money, one. I work in early childcare. But two, because it fills me. It fills me to do so many things on the side. And so when I said I feel validated, I was like, I'm thinking about all of the things that I do on the side that really fill me and bring peace to me, even if it means that I'm busy or what people think is busy. To me, it doesn't feel like I'm busy.
Yeah. I think another thing I would just add is to remember our mental wellness is thriving. We're taking care of ourselves. That sounds like a simple thing. And we don't often do it because we're busy trying to take care of everybody else. But I love the idea, for example, like you all started with a mindful exercise to get grounded in the space that you're in at the moment, to invite others to join into that peace that you're trying to create. And so that's thriving also, surviving, but it's also thriving. And that is part of taking care of yourself. Yeah. And I think that's another important piece of it. It's not only to find successes, as I was describing, but your mental wellness, finding a place or space or time for your mental wellness, even if it's a 5-minute mindful exercise or yoga, whatever it is that you do, right, that gives you that space of being well. That's thriving also.
Yeah, breathe that in. Yeah. Whew. Thank you. Latifah, you have shared so many gifts with us and with the listeners today. And, we usually will ask people about practical tools, guides, and frameworks. You have done that throughout this entire conversation. So I just want to express gratitude for your spending time with us today and sharing these gifts with our listeners. And to the listeners, thanks for listening. To keep the conversation going and for monthly reflection prompts related to each episode, sign up for our mailing list.
If you want to play with us in real time, exploring the ideas in this episode, please come to the next Campfire Chat. We look forward to our next sacred conversation with you.
Check out the show notes for details. And once again, thank you, Latifah.
Thank you.